Fruits Basket is a 2019 anime adapted from the manga series written and illustrated by Natsuki Takiya. On the surface, it's a cutesy shoujo anime about a girl who finds herself entangled in the silly antics of the Sohma family. The Sohmas are a secretive and bizarre family of weirdos who just so happen to be affected by a mystical curse which causes them to transform into little adorable animals whenever they're hugged by someone of the opposite sex. The atmosphere of the show is cheerful and comforting. The art is bright and full of inviting pastel colors, the characters are expressive and have really interesting, unique designs, and everything is cutesy enough to put you into a sugar coma. The show's female protagonist, Toru, is a human ray of sunshine, a cinnamon roll, too sweet and pure for this world. So far, this show sounds like your typical romantic slice-of-life shoujo anime, right? But lurking just underneath all the sparkly scenery, the goofy cast of characters, and the wacky hijinks is a dark secret. The Sohma family curse is much more than it initially seems. The more you watch, the more you get the feeling that there's something off about this family. Something is fundamentally wrong here. Fruits Basket is not just some feel-good shoujo romance. It's a gut-wrenching and heartfelt drama. A character study that explores the deep scars left by years of systemic abuse. Fruits Basket is diabolically cute, but it does not sugarcoat this stuff. I'm not kidding, there is some seriously dark content in this show. Manipulation, trauma, and physical and emotional abuse play a big role in the story. While the premise of the show is fantastical, it takes a thoughtful and nuanced approach to portraying the aftermath of abuse. Perhaps even more importantly, it also shows us the messy, terrifying, and beautiful process of healing after trauma. In this video, I want to discuss how the emotional abuse portrayed in Fruits Basket parallels tactics often used by abusers in real life. I also want to use the show's cast to do a character study about the traumatic effect that emotional abuse can have on someone's life. And finally, look at the journey of those same characters to show what the process of recovering from trauma can look like. This video will contain descriptions and images of emotional and physical abuse. While not a major theme in this video, there will also be brief mentions of. I'd like to make a disclaimer. I am not a psychologist or an expert on abuse. If you or someone you know is currently experiencing abuse or has been abused in the past, please seek professional help from an expert. Leaving an abusive relationship can be dangerous, and it's extremely important to talk to someone who has professional experience navigating abusive relationships. I've linked resources for abuse victims and survivors of abuse in the description of this video. So when I started writing this analysis, I wanted to look at all of the members of the Zodiac individually. I ran into some problems with that pretty quickly. First, there are 13 major members of the Sohma family, and while some of them get a lot of really excellent character development, others are in desperate need of more screen time. I am looking at you, monkey boy. So instead of doing a shallow analysis of every single Sohma, I decided to narrow it down and take a more comprehensive look at just two of these characters, Yuki and Kyo. In case it's been a while since you last watched Fruits Basket, I'm going to start with a quick refresher on the plot. By the way, this video will contain some major spoilers for the entire show, so if you haven't watched it yet, I highly recommend you go experience this masterpiece yourself. If you haven't seen it, they did make a 2001 season, but it didn't really finish the story. I recommend you skip that season and start with the 2019 first season, which is basically a remake of the original 2001 season, but better. They even kept quite a few of the original voice actors, which is really cool. Let's start with our leading lady. Toru Honda is, like most Disney princesses and shoujo protagonists, an orphan. She's a polite, shy, and ditzy high school girl who has a habit of working herself too hard and always putting others before herself. I'm not kidding. Girl is so selfless, she's basically self-destructive. When Toru is forced to move out of her grandfather's house due to renovations, she considers asking her two best friends if she could move in with them. While the show makes it pretty clear that her friends would be happy to help, Toru feels that it might be a burden to them, so she doesn't even ask. In fact, she is so worried that she might inconvenience someone that she decides that the best thing to do is camp out alone in a tent in the middle of an abandoned forest. Shockingly, it turns out that slumming it in the wilderness isn't exactly the world's smartest move, and Toru's tent and nearly all her earthly possessions ends up being destroyed in a landslide. Fortunately, one of her classmates, Yuki Sohma, who just so happens to be the most popular guy at her school, lives nearby, and thanks to anime logic, he invites her to move in with him and his housemates. After a little bit of convincing, Toru accepts his offer, and she meets the other two members of the Sohma household. Shigure, who, despite being the only actual adult in the house, is somehow the most immature person there, and Kyo, a ginger with anger management issues.
Yo, are you ready for a beating, rat boy?
About 5 minutes after she moves in, Toru accidentally stumbles into discovering the Sohma family's biggest secret. Each member of the Sohma family is possessed by an animal of the Chinese zodiac, and if they're hugged by someone of the opposite sex, poof, they transform into their animal forms. This strange little conundrum is pretty much played for laughs, and we don't get any kind of explanation about how something like this might have serious implications on someone's life. Toru writes this whole animorph thing off as an adorable inconvenience, swears she'll keep it a secret, and life goes on. She starts getting comfortable living in the house with Yuki, Kyo, and Shigure, and she also meets several other members of the Zodiac, who are also afflicted by the animal shape-shifting thing, as well as varying degrees of crazy. Toru is delighted to meet everyone, and she really starts to connect with the Sohmas and learn more about the bonds they share with one another. But as she meets more and more members of the Zodiac, it quickly becomes clear to Toru that she doesn't truly understand the full extent of the Sohma family's secret. Everyone is obviously keeping something from her, and the more questions she asks, the fewer answers she gets. The Sohmas are guarded and secretive. They're reluctant to discuss their family and their pasts. A pattern starts to develop. Even though they're wealthy and generally successful, the members of the Zodiac don't really seem happy. Suddenly, the characters' silly behaviors and strange personality traits don't seem that funny anymore. Why do Yuki and Kyo hate each other so much and constantly get into fights? Why does another Sohma constantly apologize for everything? Why does this guy have a dark side that comes out when he's upset? These aren't just funny personality quirks. The Sohmas are like this for a reason. As time passes, Toru's kindness, gentleness, and positivity start to break down their walls. They gradually open up to her little by little, and Toru gets closer and closer to realizing the truth, until she's finally confronted with it face to face. There is something seriously wrong going on with the head of the Sohma family and the Zodiac, Akito. At first glance, Akito doesn't seem like much of a threat. Akito isn't physically intimidating, isn't even the oldest member of the Sohma family. Akito is only a few years older than Toru, who's a high schooler, and yet Akito has complete and total control over the Sohmas. Control over where they're allowed to go, how they're allowed to act, and who they're allowed to love. Akito keeps them all in an iron grip, dictating every important decision. Akito is unhinged, spiteful, irrational, narcissistic, and prone to violent, dangerous tantrums at the drop of a hat, lashing out at the slightest indication of disobedience, or sometimes lashing out for no reason at all. And most of all, Akito is callously, exceptionally cruel. But why, you ask, would literal adults allow this scrawny, vindictive tornado of violence to control their lives? Because they don't have a choice.
What did you think? That I was just another animal spirit? I am God. I am the master of their hearts and souls.
That's why they can't disobey, even when they want to.
The Sohmas have a supernatural connection to Akito. They have a desperate, innate compulsion to please Akito, be useful to Akito, to love and be loved by Akito. As much as they might hate it, they are bound to Akito's will. In a way, Akito is the Sohma family's patriarch. These bonds, while supernatural in nature, are symbolizing bonds that each one of us has with our families. The story of Fruits Basket isn't really about the Zodiac or the curse of becoming an animal. It's about what happens when bonds between family members become chains instead. What happens when a relationship that is supposed to be filled with mutual love becomes toxic and harmful. How do we let go? How can someone possibly trust anyone ever again when they are so poorly mistreated by people who are supposed to care for them? The people who are supposed to care for them the most, their family. When people think of abuse, typically they imagine physical violence. And while it's true that Akito is extremely physically abusive to some of the Sohmas, I want to focus more so on emotional abuse in this video. Emotional abuse is harder to detect than physical abuse, and it's also much more likely to be overlooked or dismissed because it doesn't leave evidence in the same obvious way that physical abuse can. The APA Dictionary of Psychology defines emotional abuse as a pattern of behavior in which one person deliberately and repeatedly subjects another to non-physical acts that are detrimental to behavioral and effective functioning and overall mental well-being. Researchers have yet to formulate a universally agreed-on definition of the concept, but they have identified a variety of forms that emotional abuse may take, including verbal abuse, intimidation and terrorization, humiliation and degradation, exploitation, harassment, rejection and withholding of affection, isolation, and excessive control. Another term for emotional abuse is psychological abuse. So now that we have a definition, let's get more specific and review several of Akito's behaviors which exemplify the tactics used by emotional abusers. Some are pretty obvious, for example, verbal abuse.
This is why I despise women. Devious creatures. And that mane-like hair of yours only makes it worse. It's repulsive. Remember, you're a monster, Kyo. A freak.
Get it through your head, idiot. The rat is despised by everyone. No one cares about you, no one at all. You're lucky I'm here. I look out for you, and if I didn't, then your life would be worth less than nothing.
Akito also employs calculated manipulation to distort the Sohma's sense of reality. You've probably heard of this before. It's a tactic called gaslighting. Gaslighting is more subtle than just lying to someone. It's a type of psychological control that involves repeatedly lying to someone in order to make the victim question not only what is true, but their own sanity or their own sense of self. The American Psychological Association explains that the term gaslighting once referred to manipulation so extreme it could induce mental illness or lead the gaslit person to be committed to a psychiatric institution. Probably the most extreme example of gaslighting in Fruits Basket is Akito's treatment of Kyo. Kyo is possessed by the cat zodiac spirit, which happens to come with not one, but two forms. This cuddly cute little fluff ball, and the cat's true form, or what I like to call his bonus form, which is, whatever this thing is. Kyo is unlike the rest of the Sohma family, because the cat's true form is considered to be a dangerous abomination. So what does this have to do with gaslighting? Unfortunately, Kyo's mother committed suicide when he was a child. It's heavily implied that her death was the result of abuse from her husband, as well as the extreme stress caused by the Sohma family's mistreatment towards both her and Kyo because of his cat form. Akito, however, consistently pushes a false narrative that because Kyo is possessed by the cat, he is inherently a monster, and therefore Kyo is directly to blame for his own mother's death.
And because of your twisted nature, your mother is dead.
You're wrong.
Honestly, the one who should have died was you.
I killed her. Oh, please stop!
Akito's emotional abuse also involves controlling the Sohma's social lives and whereabouts. Akito separates Yuki from the other members of the Zodiac, making it harder for him to interact.
I realized something. In all my life, I had never talked to any of the other Zodiac members. I was always with Akito. I'd seen the person they called my older brother, but I'd never spoken to him.
Isolation is a fundamental method used by abusers against their victims in order to prevent them from forming social relationships and developing a support system who might be able to help them escape their abuse. A more extreme example of this social control includes the treatment of Kyo. For generations, the Sohma family has stigmatized and shunned the Zodiac member possessed by the cat spirit. This shunning even includes confining this person and forcing them to live their adult lives out in a cell. Shunning is practiced in real life, although it doesn't usually include imprisonment. Family or religious leaders use shunning to ensure that people will obey them in order to maintain their membership within a community. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses shun those members who choose to leave, or even those who are still practicing but are considered sinful. This can be extremely psychologically damaging, as those who want to leave the church find that all of their social connections, friends, and families have cut ties with them, leaving them with zero social support system. All these tactics, verbal abuse, gaslighting, isolation, shunning, are emotionally abusive behaviors. There's one last abusive strategy used by Akito that is woven in with all of these other strategies. It's called DARVO, which is an acronym which stands for Deny, Attack, Reverse, Victim, and Offender. The term DARVO was introduced in 1997 by Dr. Jennifer Freyd, a psychology researcher focusing on the psychology of sexual violence. Here's how it works. When an abuser is confronted, they might deny that the abuse ever took place, attack the person confronting them, and reverse the roles to turn themselves into the victim and the confronter into the offender. DARVO discredits victims and allows abusers to convince themselves that they haven't actually done anything wrong, which helps them to avoid feeling guilty about their abusive words or actions. There are tons of examples of this throughout the show.
But then we begged Akito to allow us to marry.
Think I'll give him to someone like you?
Wait, just calm down!
You're the one to blame! It's your fault if Hatorigo's blind, you hear me?
Kana!
This is all your fault! You haven't been kind to me lately.
I am kind to you.
Not kind enough. You used to look only at me. I deserve better from you.
This is what emotional abuse looks like. Tearing down someone's self-esteem, using lies and gaslighting to manipulate them, isolating them to separate them from anyone who might be able to help, and then blaming everything on the victim. But what consequences does emotional abuse have? There may not be bruises, blood, or broken bones, but emotional abuse can leave permanent damage. And there's probably no better example of how emotional abuse can wreak havoc on an individual's sense of self than the two characters we're going to examine, Yuki and Kyo. Yuki is the first member of the Sohma family that the audience is introduced to, and at first he looks like the farthest thing from a traumatized victim of abuse. In fact, he basically seems perfect. He has everything. He's handsome, he's strong, he's smart, he's student council president. In classic shoujo anime fashion, the girls at school are so thirsty for him that they refer to him as Prince Yuki and have created a fan club specifically designed for the purpose of monitoring his every moment and just generally obsessing over him.
We in the Prince Yuki Club are dedicated to worshipping the prince who has graced our school with his presence.
But despite his reputation as the perfect Prince Charming, Yuki is reserved and cold. He isolates himself and struggles to grow close with others. He keeps people at a distance, he fears rejection, and he can't convey his feelings well. He seems trapped by his perfect persona and believes that no one would ever really accept his true self. In short, Yuki has a serious case of imposter syndrome. What is imposter syndrome? Dr. Andrea Robinson defines it as a pervasive feeling of self-doubt, insecurity, and incompetence despite evidence that you're skilled and successful. People with imposter syndrome feel like they're frauds and are vastly more flawed or inadequate when those around them, when really, they're not. Yuki's identity issues and his struggle with self-confidence stem from his childhood and his treatment by his parents, Akito, and the other members of the Sohma family. His animal form, the rat, is favored in the Legend of the Zodiac.
That means the rat is closer to God than the others are. And that out of all of them, you're the one who's most similar to me. You're special, just like I am.
At first, Akito and Yuki are just playmates, but even as a child, Akito becomes controlling. Out of a desire to keep Yuki as close as possible, Akito isolates him and brainwashes him into believing he is worthless, and no one else would ever love or accept him.
Akito burned those pitch-black thoughts into me. I started to believe them. Nobody cared about me. I was worthless.
When Yuki finally gets courage to ask for help from his family, he's ignored by his brother and cruelly rejected by his mother. With no external support system to rely on, Yuki begins to believe Akito's lies. His sense of identity crumbles. He avoids getting close to anyone. He begins to do his best to play the part of a perfect child and fit into the Sohma family's idea of what the rat is supposed to be like. This is where his Prince Charming facade and his imposter syndrome come from. Although Yuki doesn't face significant physical abuse, he has some of the deepest psychological scars among members of the Zodiac. His concept of who he is as a person is so warped by Akito that he becomes defined by his inadequacies and weaknesses. He's an incredibly powerful example of the real and debilitating long-term effects of emotional abuse. Another possible effect of this abuse is complex PTSD or CPTSD. While traditional PTSD is typically related to a single very traumatic episode, CPTSD is caused by repeated exposures to traumatic events occurring over a long period of time. According to Dr. Matthew Tull, a psychology professor at the University of Toledo who has published research on PTSD, some of the most common symptoms of CPTSD include issues forming attachments to others, negative self-concept, problems controlling behavior, an inability to regulate emotions, and problems with executive function. Yuki's character exhibits virtually all of these qualities. He feels like a fraud despite his reputation as the perfect Prince Charming. He's terrified of connecting with others because they might catch a glimpse of what he's really like. He's constantly pretending that he's perfectly fine, but he only behaves this way because he's been conditioned to mask his true feelings. Yuki can't accept himself for who he is, and so he can't let anyone else in. Now let's discuss the Sohma family's resident tsundere, Kyo.
You girly boy!
That didn't take long.
Go to hell!
And he's out.
Because he's possessed by the cat, Kyo is the scapegoat of the Sohma family. He's excluded, ostracized, hated, and pitied by the other Sohmas. He becomes a target for them to project their own anger onto. Kyo is brash, violent, and impulsive. The smallest comment can send him flying off the handle. He's combative, self-destructive, and rejects help when other people offer it. He's also incredibly critical of himself.
Why didn't she kill me instead of herself? Why am I still breathing? In a world I don't deserve to be a part of.
Unlike Yuki, Kyo's interactions with Akito are few and far between. Much of his psychological trauma comes from the emotional neglect and the result of his social isolation and shunning. While traditional neglect typically refers to a parent or caregiver who fails to provide their child with basic physical needs, like food, clothing, and shelter, emotional neglect is different. Emotional neglect occurs when an individual's needs are consistently disregarded, ignored, invalidated, or unappreciated. While I was doing research for this video, I found a really excellent character analysis of Kyo by Tumblr user Teton Yeager, who has a research degree in critical social psychology. Teton makes some really excellent points, but one part that really stuck with me was this. Kyo learned early on that the people he should be able to rely on in times of distress and danger are the exact people he can't rely on, so he never learned how to connect to people. Difficulty forming social-emotional relationships is one of the more visible effects of neglect, but there are also impacts that are harder to see. Relative to physically abused children, neglected children have more severe cognitive and academic defects, social withdrawal and limited peer interactions, and internalizing, as opposed to externalizing, problems. If there's anyone in the Sohma family who internalizes his problems, it's Kyo. Kyo's biggest problem essentially boils down to this. His entire life, the people who were supposed to love him instead told him that he's a monster and he doesn't deserve to be loved. And when we first meet him, Kyo 100% believes that he is an irredeemable monster who does not deserve love. He hates himself. Kyo's story automatically reminded me of something that happens a lot in real life. When I think about how he was treated, I immediately draw parallels in my mind to LGBTQ+ kids and teens who come out and then are rejected by their families. I do want to be clear that I don't equate a fictional character with the very serious reality that these individuals face. I absolutely don't think that queer people are monsters, excluding the Lady Gaga fans who literally call themselves monsters. I just want to connect the dots to provide a real-life example of how family rejection can be really damaging. Oftentimes, these kids who come out are immediately and very cruelly rejected. They're not just kicked out of their homes. They're not just socially ignored and cut off from their families. In many cases, especially when they belong to conservative religious families, these kids are told that they're abominations, that their sexuality or gender is a moral failing, and that it's a sign that they themselves are corrupt, that they do not deserve love. This is absolutely devastating. And it very clearly takes an enormous psychological toll on people. A 2016 study completed by Dr. Augustus Klein, the head of the Transgender Research Initiative at the Hunter Alliance for Research and Translation, or HART, examined a group of transgender and gender nonconforming adults, specifically examining the connection between family rejection and the risk of suicide attempt among this population. Just under 6,500 transgender and gender nonconforming individuals participated in this analysis. The results showed that being rejected by family for their sexual identity increased the odds of suicide attempt. In fact, the odds of a suicide attempt increased significantly with increasing levels of family rejection. Being rejected and demonized by the very people who are supposed to protect you is deeply traumatic, and it can absolutely change someone's self-image and their perception of other people. I think that Kyo's story might really resonate with someone who has experienced something like their family members scapegoating or excluding them because of their sexuality or gender. Internalized guilt, shame, and self-loathing is not a side effect of being gay. It is not a reflection of failure or inadequacy. It's a byproduct that happens when the people who are supposed to care for us and love us choose to cause harm by withholding that love as a form of punishment. It says far more about the person who did the rejecting than it does about the person who was rejected. So now that I've talked about both of them, it's pretty clear that there's a strong juxtaposition between Yuki and Kyo. The pair of them seem to hate each other, but this hatred is actually rooted in jealousy. Kyo wishes he could be like Yuki, who received attention from Akito and is included as an important member of the Sohma family. On the other hand, Yuki, who is constantly micromanaged and controlled by Akito, wishes that he had Kyo's freedom to live outside the constricting rules of the Sohmas. This character foil makes for good storytelling, but it also shows us that emotional abuse can manifest in very different ways. Two abused people, even if they belong in the same family, might cope with that abuse completely differently. So now that we've talked about what emotional abuse looks like and how it can have a very different effect on different people, we're left with a final question. What about the aftermath? How can people recover after they experience emotional abuse? In Fruits Basket, there isn't some grand reveal or crazy event that causes the bonds between Akito and the rest of the Sohma family to break. There's not really a dramatic final showdown. Unfortunately, Akito does not, as this Redditor so deeply desires, get chokeslammed into a refrigerator. Instead, the bond breaking is kind of vague. It has a lot more to do with each individual member of the Zodiac coming to terms with their own internal conflict, facing their trauma, acknowledging it, and making an effort to move forward. Yuki's gradual steps towards learning to recognize his own worth start pretty small. In seeing how Toru's kindness, compassion, and positivity have such a significant impact on the rest of the Sohma family, Yuki feels challenged to look inward. He begins to strive for self-acceptance and self-improvement.
I have flaws, weaknesses. Truth is, if I keep shifting the blame, then I'll never change. And I want to.
Yuki starts to be more honest with himself and the people around him. He becomes gradually more outspoken and less concerned with maintaining his Prince Charming persona. He gets comfortable with showing others the not-so-perfect sides of himself.
You're kind. You know that? Thank you. Don't turn into IMA.
Not a chance.
Here!
Yuki's progression highlights many of the real-life ways that people can overcome imposter syndrome. Psychiatrist Dr. Susan Albers-Bowling lists a few ways that people struggling with self-doubt and feeling like a fraud can start improving. Separate feelings from facts, talk to others about your feelings, and recognizing your own accomplishments. Yuki also focuses on being more sensitive to those around him. He notices when other people are struggling and offers them support. Research actually shows that being emotionally supportive to others is reciprocal. Helping someone else navigate their emotions can help us with our own emotional well-being. A study completed by doctors at the University of Cambridge and the University of Columbia found that people who engaged in helping others by sharing their own feelings and being receptive to the feelings of others had both decreased symptoms of depression and an improved ability to regulate their own emotions. For Yuki, I think that healing from his trauma was about acknowledging himself, his real strengths and real weaknesses, his fears and his insecurities, and coming to terms with his flaws without allowing himself to be defined by them. Kyo's journey is one about unconditional love. Kyo didn't really get to experience that after his mother's passing. I think that Kyo's very first time experiencing this unconditional love, the kind you might receive from a parent, is from Kazuma Sohma. This man is, in my opinion, an unsung hero of the Fruits Basket story. The Samwise Gamgee to Toru's Frodo Baggins, if you will. Kazuma is a member of the Sohma family, but he isn't part of the inner circle that's affected by the Zodiac curse. He's bound to Sohma family tradition and knows about the animal secret, but he doesn't have to face it the same way that the 12 Zodiacs do. Kazuma's grandfather was actually the last reincarnation of the cat spirit. Kazuma never even met his own grandfather because he participated in the family tradition of shunning the cat. Later, after Kyo is born and his mother dies, Kazuma takes him in to atone in a way for ignoring his own grandfather. While at first, Kazuma admits that he took care of Kyo out of obligation or to heal his guilty conscience, he clearly grows to care for Kyo like a son. Kazuma accepts Kyo for who he is, unconditionally.
Not every soul in this world has rejected you, Kyo. Maybe now all looks dark, but hope will come again.
Kazuma's love and acceptance is a first step for Kyo. It helps him begin to regain confidence in himself. However, it's not until Kyo's relationship with Toru develops that he's actually able to face his fears and his self-loathing. When he first receives affection and kindness from Toru, Kyo rejects it, feeling unworthy. Time and time again, over and over, Kyo tells Toru that her kindness and love is wasted on him, that he can't be saved, that he doesn't deserve to be saved.
I won't hold back. I'll hurt her so badly that she'll never forgive me. So badly she'll never have to worry about me again. I'll wreck everything, so she'll never want to look back.
But Toru never gives up. Over and over and over, she stubbornly refuses to let Kyo believe that he's worthless.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
It's only after countless reminders that he is not a monster that Kyo is finally able to accept that he is both capable of giving and receiving love.
It's okay. Because I love you no matter what.
I mean, there's nothing to be afraid of now. Not if you're with me.
Now, I don't mean to say that Toru cures Kyo, or that she's the sole reason that Kyo is able to break the curse and recognize that he's worthy of love. Toru is not the savior of the Sohma family. She's a catalyst. Just like the supernatural Sohma family bonds are a metaphor representing family ties, Toru isn't meant to be a literal representation of how to help people recover from abuse. A single person can make a huge difference in supporting someone who's recovering from the effects of abuse, but it isn't healthy for one person to try and cure someone's abuse-induced trauma. This can be detrimental to both the supporter and the person working on their recovery. Instead, Toru is an example of how one individual can be part of a positive support system for an individual who's recovering from trauma. Toru, after all, has got her own flaws she needs to learn how to overcome. She has to learn how to be more selfish, to speak up when she wants something, to stop self-sacrificing for others all the time and live for herself. As she is there for the Sohmas to help them learn to love themselves, the Sohmas are there for her to help her do the same. By being a positive influence, by opening up to them, Toru created a cycle of positivity and support. In fact, research actually shows that both receiving kindness and performing acts of kindness is beneficial to mental health. A 2020 study by Dr. Eva Kahana examined how altruistic compassion and kindness can affect mental health. In her study of 334 people, participants who reported feeling that they both received love and had feelings of love for others reported declining levels of symptoms of depression. The authors found that both giving and receiving loving emotions had a powerful influence on psychological well-being. There's nothing out there quite like Fruits Basket. This show is gut-wrenching and heartfelt and piercing. There's so much love and care and time put into the characters and their growth. Nothing feels hurried or manufactured. It's so easy to relate to these characters and their struggles and to root for them to grow and realize their worth. Fruits Basket taught me a lot of things about self-love, acceptance, and striving not only to be a better person myself, but also to connect with people around me. If I learned anything from Fruits Basket, it's this: be kind to others and be kind to yourself. Or if you're this guy, don't hug people from rich and isolated families, no matter how good looking they are.